Welcome to Poland Daily History with me, Nicholas Richardson. And we're continuing our canter around the course of Polish history with my studio guest, Professor Krzysztof Jabłonka. Professor, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And if we can start today, we're looking at Władysław Sikorski, who was, after the fall of Poland in the Second World War, the first Prime Minister of Poland, the government in exile, based in London. What can you tell us about Sikorski?
Pamiętajmy, że Sikorski jest młodszym kolegą i konkurentem Józefa Piłsudskiego.
Władysław Sikorski was a younger colleague and competitor of Józef Piłsudski. These two greatly important people for Poland differed both in their origin and place of birth. Józef Piłsudski, the Marshal of Poland, came from Lithuania and represented the old tradition of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, while Władysław Sikorski was born near Tarnów, Galicia, in the Austrian partition, where Poles were treated well. They had everything at their disposal except for the army. The army had to be supplemented by volunteer shooting troops, which initially trained as the so-called National Landwehr, meaning voluntary paramilitary troops. They were called the Riflemen, or the Riflemen's Union. Władysław Sikorski was a very generous assistant in forming these units. In World War I, he fell into conflict with Piłsudski, as he was of a different opinion. Józef Piłsudski disbanded his legions in order to move on to the Entente side. He succeeded in doing so. It was a huge masterpiece of how to switch from pro-German troops to anti-German troops. He clearly said that the role of Poles is to win over all three partitions, and not just one with the help of the other two. That is where Piłsudski was disturbed by Władysław Sikorski, who was extremely attached to Austria, stood by their side for a very long time, and continued his cooperation with Austria when Piłsudski was already ending it. This is where the paths of these two men crossed. When Piłsudski, as head of state, resigned from all functions and went into exile to Sulejówek near Warsaw, the time came for Władysław Sikorski, who became Minister of Military Affairs. Indeed, at that moment he was forming an army. He had a great influence, above all on the Lviv district, with which he was connected. He initiated the erection of the grave of an unknown soldier in Warsaw, and after Piłsudski's May coup, in which he behaved really decently because he kept his neutrality, he did not order the army to fight either against Piłsudski or against the government, because he feared the Ukrainian uprising. For some time he was treated well by Marshal Piłsudski. Ultimately, he found himself in exile and became very dependent on French intelligence. When the war broke out in 1939, when the whole government and command had to leave Poland, fleeing to Romania, as a result of French intelligence, a new government led by Władysław Sikorski was appointed. He, in turn, clung to France too tightly, and it was difficult to explain to him that France was failing and that it was necessary to evacuate to Great Britain. If it had not been for his excellent collaborators, Sikorski would have probably become prisoner of German special services.
No i gdyby nie jego świetni współpracownicy, prawdopodobnie Sikorski byłby już więźniem, jak nie rządu Vichy, to na pewno niemieckich służb.
Professor, if I could now ask you essentially two questions. One, how did Sikorski manage in England once he'd left France? And second, of course, in 1943, he died in an air crash, which has been controversial ever since. Maybe you could say a couple of words about those two subjects.
No, to jest najpoważniejszy problem Polski i II wojny światowej.
This was the most serious problem of Poland in World War II, the death of General Sikorski. In France, the government maintained a great deal of autonomy, even changed its place of residence from Paris, where all offices of the French Republic were located, to Angers. It was an exceptionally Polish place. Not far away was the camp in Kouéquidan. From there, it was possible to leave the ports of Vendée much faster and sail to Great Britain. The Polish government in exile resided in the Rubens Hotel there. At a time when France had fallen and even partly switched to the German side as part of the Nazi puppet government in Vichy, Winston Churchill proclaimed Poland as his then only ally and spoke beautiful words towards Poland. Meanwhile, King George VI was visiting the Polish army. He also hosted Polish pilots in recognition of their contribution to the Battle of England, as well as training camps in Scotland. The Polish government played a huge role in the defense of Great Britain. They were the first to fight, that was the saying, and it was true. Władysław Sikorski's government also led all the other governments in exile, and let us remember that this list included the Norwegian government with King Harald VII. There was a part of the Danish government, because their main government was surprised by the German onslaught, and the king was not able to leave the country. There were of course the governments of the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the French Committee of National Liberation, formed by Charles de Gaulle. All these governments were presided over by Władysław Sikorski. He even proposed to Czechoslovakia a West Slavic union of 3 nations in the future, and even tried to include the Sorbs as the 4th nation. It seemed that these were sincere actions. Unfortunately, he did not know that Edvard Beneš, president of the Second Czech Republic, was an agent of the Soviet Main Intelligence Directorate, or the GRU, who obviously torpedoed these efforts. Beneš was loyal to Stalin and listened to him unconditionally. Perhaps he was even involved in the attack on Sikorski, because the pilot of the plane that crashed was a Czech by the name of Edward Prchal, who under very odd circumstances survived the accident and was unable to say why he fell into the water. Our Prime Minister and Commander-in-Chief flew to the Polish army, which had just left Russia in a terrible condition, neglected, infected with typhus, but still alive. He visited the army, it reformed, and then captured Monte Cassino, which the Allied armies were unable to capture for 6 months. Sikorski was returning from there, and only then did the lightning strike him. To this day, the assumptions of who the culprit of General Sikorski's untimely death are ascribed to Russian intelligence.
Wtedy uderzył w niego piorun śmierci. Do dziś przypuszczenia kierowane są pod adresem wywiadu rosyjskiego.
That's all we've got time for on this episode. Thank you for watching, and thank you to Professor Jabłonka for joining us. Do join us again on Poland Daily History, where we delve into the fascinating and long history that is Poland.